The night my daughter looked at me with pure contempt and called me a disgusting old hag, something inside me broke. But it was not what she expected. I had spent decades building a life, a home, and a future for her, believing sacrifice was the same as love. In that single moment, I realized I was no longer being loved. I was being managed. The insult was sharp, but the betrayal beneath it cut deeper. That was the night I stopped asking how to keep the peace and started asking how much of myself I had already lost. Before we dive into today's story, let us know in the comments, where are you joining us from today? We love knowing how our stories connect with people across the world. And remember, subscribing and turning on notifications means you'll always be part of our next adventure. Now, take a deep breath, clear your thoughts, and get ready for a story that promises emotion, surprise, and inspiration from beginning to end. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for more than 3 decades, I owned and operated a small physical therapy clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona. I built that business with my own hands after graduating from college with more determination than money. When my husband Daniel died of a sudden stroke 5 years ago, the clinic and our single-story home were the only tangible proof that our life together had mattered. The house, with its pale stucco walls and wide desert windows, still held the echo of his laughter in the evenings. It was the last place where I felt solid. 2 years ago, my daughter Vanessa came back to live with me. She was 36, newly divorced, and drowning in credit card debt she tried to describe as temporary setbacks. She told me she wanted to move home to help me, that she worried about me being alone. I wanted to believe her. After Daniel died, the quiet in that house felt heavier than any grief I had known. When Vanessa arrived with her 10-year-old daughter Lily, the rooms filled with movement again. Lily's sneakers by the door, her school books on the kitchen counter, her laughter drifting down the hallway. For a while, I convinced myself that this was what family was supposed to look like. But warmth slowly turned into imbalance. Vanessa did not search for steady work the way I had at her age. She spoke often about online ventures and brand partnerships, yet most afternoons I found her scrolling through her phone, chasing an audience that never quite materialized. The bills, however, were very real. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the homeowner's insurance, the groceries, and the property taxes. I drove Lily to school each morning and picked her up in the afternoon. I cooked dinner, washed the dishes, folded the laundry. I told myself that this was temporary, that a mother helps her child when life collapses. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted in ways that were harder to name. Vanessa rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She replaced Daniel's framed photographs with abstract prints she said were more modern. She began referring to the house as if it were hers, telling a neighbor that she had taken over the place. Each time, I felt myself shrink a little, as if I were becoming a guest in the home I had paid for. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself Lily needed stability. I told myself that pride had no place in motherhood. The night everything changed was unremarkable at first. I was at the kitchen table reviewing my monthly credit card statement, a habit from my business years that never left me. A series of charges caught my attention: designer cosmetics, boutique clothing, an upscale salon appointment. The total was more than I spent on groceries in a month. I knew I had authorized a secondary card for Vanessa when she first moved in, assuming it would help her regain balance. I had not expected it to fund indulgence. When she came into the kitchen, I spoke gently. I said that I had noticed the charges and that we needed to discuss boundaries. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply asked her to stop using the card for personal luxuries. She turned toward me so quickly that her chair scraped against the tile. Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before, and then she shouted, "You disgusting old hag!" The words did not just hang in the air, they cut through it. Lily stood frozen in the hallway, eyes wide, as if she had witnessed something irreversible. I felt no immediate tears, no dramatic collapse. Instead, there was a strange stillness inside me, as if a door had quietly shut. That was the night I understood that love without limits becomes permission, and something inside me shifted in a way that would never shift back. If you are still watching and you felt the weight of that moment, comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. What happened next changed everything, and trust me, the insult was only the beginning. The words my daughter hurled at me did not echo for long. What lingered was the silence that followed. The next morning, Vanessa moved through the kitchen as if nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee, scrolled through her phone, and reminded Lily about her spelling sound test. There was no apology, no embarrassment, not even avoidance. It was as though cruelty had become ordinary enough to forget overnight. I realized then that if I continued pretending it had not happened, I would be complicit in my own erasure. In the days that followed, something shifted in me. I stopped reacting and began observing. Vanessa's tone changed in subtle but deliberate ways. When speaking to neighbors over the low stucco wall in the backyard, she mentioned that I had been a little forgetful lately. She said it casually, with a sympathetic sigh, as if she were burdened by concern. I overheard her once telling Lily that Grandma needs more supervision these days. The words were soft, but the implication was not. Soon after, she informed me that she had scheduled an appointment with a neurologist in Phoenix. She framed it as routine, a precaution. I had not asked for one, nor had I expressed concern about my memory. Still, she insisted it was important. During the appointment, she answered several questions before I could. She described minor lapses in exaggerated detail, painting me as fragile, uncertain. I felt myself shrinking in that sterile examination room, not because I doubted my mind, but because I saw how easily someone else could shape a narrative about it. A few afternoons later, Vanessa placed a stack of papers on the dining table. She said they were documents, just in case something happens. Her voice was almost cheerful. I took my time reading them. The first was a durable financial power of attorney granting her authority over my accounts. The second concerned medical decision-making. Beneath those lay informational material about assisted living facilities in Phoenix and Mesa. The words were polite, sanitized, but the message was clear. These were not emergency plans. They were pathways. I did not sign anything. I told her I wanted to review the documents carefully. She shrugged as if my hesitation were quaint. That evening, a quiet instinct urged me to check my email. I rarely used it for anything beyond banking notifications and messages from former patients, but something in my chest would not settle. There, in the sent folder of the shared computer Vanessa often used, I found correspondence with a real estate brokerage. She had inquired about listing my home, describing it as a desirable property in a high-demand neighborhood. In one message, she wrote that the owner may be declining mentally and considering assisted living. I read that line 3 times. In that moment, the scattered incidents of the past months aligned with unnerving precision. The rearranged furniture, the offhand comments about retirement communities, the subtle portrayal of me as confused. None of it had been random. It was preparation. I did not confront her. Not yet. Instead, I sat alone at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet. The refrigerator hummed steadily, the desert air pressed against the windows, and I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I was no longer dealing with occasional disrespect from a stressed daughter. I was witnessing the early stages of a strategy. And if there was a strategy forming against me, then I needed one of my own. If you are still here and starting to see the pattern unfold, comment number 2 below so I know you are paying attention. because what I discovered in the accounts was far more calculated than I ever imagined. By the time I finished reading those emails to the real estate brokerage, I understood that emotion would not protect me. Precision would. I had built a medical practice from nothing but discipline and long hours. If there was a strategy forming around me, I would respond the only way I knew how, by following the details. The next morning, after Vanessa left to take Lily to school, I sat down at the same kitchen table where she had once spread out those power of attorney papers. I opened my laptop and logged into my primary bank account. I began with the last 3 months of statements, line by line, the way I used to reconcile insurance reimbursements at the clinic. At first, the charges seemed ordinary: utility payments, property taxes, groceries. Then I noticed a pattern: small transfers, $80 here, $120 there, sent through a mobile payment application. They were subtle enough to blend into normal spending, but there were many of them. When I totaled the amounts, my chest tightened. What appeared insignificant in isolation had become thousands of dollars. I checked the cardholder details. The secondary card I had authorized when Vanessa first moved in was active. Several online purchases were tied to it: clothing boutiques, cosmetics retailers, specialty wellness subscriptions. These were not emergencies. They were lifestyle expenses. Still, I forced myself not to jump to conclusions. I opened the savings account I had established years ago for Lily's college education. That account was sacred to me. I had contributed consistently, even during slower seasons at the clinic. The balance had always represented possibility. There, in stark digital print, was a withdrawal of $5,000. I stared at the number, certain I must be misreading it. I checked the transaction history again. The withdrawal had been processed electronically, not through a bank branch. There was no notation that I had authorized it in person. A quiet ache spread through me. This was no longer about my comfort or pride. It was about Lily's future. When Vanessa returned home that afternoon, I asked her to sit with me in the kitchen. I turned the laptop toward her so she could see the statements. I did not accuse her. I simply asked her to explain the transfers and the withdrawal from Lily's account. She barely glanced at the screen. "Mom, you approved those. You just don't remember," she said. The words were delivered calmly, almost patiently, as though she were correcting a child. For a brief, terrifying moment, doubt slipped in. Had I agreed in passing? Had I forgotten? I remembered the neurologist's appointment, the way Vanessa had emphasized minor lapses. I remembered her telling neighbors I was becoming forgetful, the possibility that I could be mistaken pressed against me like heat in the Arizona summer. I closed the laptop and retreated to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, replaying the last several months in my mind. I had not signed a withdrawal form. I had not authorized an electronic transfer from Lily's account. I had not received any notification requesting confirmation. Then another detail surfaced. My bank was set up to send transaction alerts to my mobile phone. I checked my messages. There were no alerts for the $5,000 withdrawal. I walked back into the kitchen and opened the settings page for the account. The notification number had been changed. It was no longer my phone number listed there. It was Vanessa's. The final thread snapped into place. I was not confused. I was being managed. The neurologist appointment, the quiet comments to neighbors, the power of attorney forms, the email about listing my house, and now the altered bank notifications. It was all part of the same design. I felt something steady settle inside me. If she was building a case against my mind, then I would begin building a defense for my life. If you are still watching and feeling the tension rise, comment number 3 below to stay with me. The financial trail was just the surface, and the next move would reveal how far this plan really went. After I discovered that the bank notifications had been redirected to Vanessa's phone, I understood that confrontation would only alert her. If she was constructing a narrative about my mental decline, I needed to act before she solidified it. Anger would not help me. Documentation would. 2 days later, I drove across Scottsdale to the office of Harold Benton, an estate planning attorney I had once referred patients to when they needed help protecting medical directives. His office was modest, tucked between a tax preparer and a real estate firm. I appreciated that. It suggested steadiness rather than spectacle. I did not dramatize my story. I laid out printed bank statements, screenshots of altered notification settings, copies of the power of attorney forms Vanessa had placed before me, and the email correspondence with the brokerage describing me as declining mentally. Harold read everything without interruption. His expression remained professional, but his tone shifted when he finally spoke. He explained that what I described had the hallmarks of financial exploitation, particularly involving an older adult. He said that subtle control over accounts, combined with attempts to document diminished capacity, often preceded forced asset transfers. Hearing someone articulate the pattern confirmed what my instincts had already concluded. I was not imagining the strategy. I was inside it. We began with immediate protections. Harold drafted revocation documents canceling any existing powers of attorney, even though I had not signed the ones Vanessa presented. He advised me to notify my bank in writing and to require in-person authorization for significant withdrawals. That afternoon, I contacted the bank's fraud department and restored all security settings to my own contact information. I canceled the secondary credit card. I changed every password associated with my finances. Next, we addressed Lily's college fund. I had opened that account years ago, envisioning it as a gift of opportunity. Harold suggested transferring the remaining balance into an irrevocable trust with an independent trustee. That structure would prevent unilateral access, even by family members, without clear documentation. The idea felt both painful and necessary. I signed the preliminary paperwork with steady hands. Before I left, Harold reviewed public records related to my property. Within minutes, he located a scheduled appraisal request initiated by Vanessa. In the notes field, she had written that the owner may be declining mentally and considering assisted living. The language was strategic. It framed a narrative in advance of any sale. I did not react outwardly. Instead, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. This was not a moment of impulsive resentment from a frustrated daughter. It was a sequence of deliberate steps. Harold then proposed a stronger safeguard, transferring my home into an irrevocable trust. Doing so would shield it from unauthorized sale and complicate any attempt to argue diminished capacity for asset control. The suggestion struck me harder than anything else that afternoon. That house was where Daniel and I had hosted holiday dinners, where Lily took her first steps across the living room tile. Moving it into a trust felt like severing something intangible. But I also understood that memory did not reside in a deed. If I allowed sentiment to override protection, I would lose both. I signed the documents initiating the transfer. When I walked out into the desert sunlight, the air felt sharper, almost cleansing. For months, I had moved through my own home as if I were shrinking. Now, for the first time since Daniel died, I did not feel like prey. I felt prepared. If you are still here and wondering how this confrontation will explode, comment number 4 below to let me know you are locked in. What happened in my living room changed the balance of power forever. The afternoon Vanessa staged what she later called a conversation began with an unusual stillness in the house. She told me that a few people were coming over to talk about some concerns. Her tone was overly measured, the kind she used when presenting something rehearsed. Lily was instructed to stay upstairs and finish her homework. I sensed the arrangement before I saw it. When I entered the living room, the furniture had been shifted into a semicircle. Seated there were the neurologist I had visited weeks earlier, two of Vanessa's close friends, and a real estate agent whose face I vaguely recognized from a brochure left on our kitchen counter. Vanessa stood at the center of them, hands clasped as though this were a support group rather than an ambush. She began speaking about love, about worry, about the difficulty of watching a parent age. The neurologist asked a series of familiar cognitive questions: the date, the name of the current president, a brief memory exercise. I answered calmly, without hesitation. My years running a medical practice had taught me that composure unsettles those who expect panic. Vanessa interrupted twice to remind the room of small incidents she claimed demonstrated confusion. She described misplaced reading glasses and a forgotten grocery item as evidence of decline. The real estate agent then shifted the conversation toward practicality, mentioning the advantages of downsizing and reducing financial strain. It was presented as compassion. It felt like containment. When the questioning concluded, I stood. My knees did not tremble. I walked to the console table by the hallway where I had placed a folder earlier that morning. I returned to the center of the room and set it on the coffee table. Inside were notarized documents revoking any powers of attorney, confirmation letters from my bank showing restored security controls, and the trust agreement transferring ownership of the house into an irrevocable structure. I explained evenly that all financial access had been secured and that any attempt to list or sell the property without my consent would be legally void. The neurologist glanced through the pages and nodded once professionally. Vanessa did not move. Her expression shifted from confidence to disbelief as she realized the sequence had reversed. There was one more disclosure I had prepared. 3 years earlier, I had sold my physical therapy clinic to a younger practitioner and invested the proceeds into a diversified retirement portfolio. The returns had been steady, far exceeding what Vanessa assumed I possessed. I outlined this without embellishment. My financial stability did not depend on her management or oversight. The room grew quiet, in a way that felt entirely different from the silence after her insult weeks before. This silence belonged to recognition. The friends exchanged uncomfortable looks. The real estate agent gathered his folder. One by one, they stood and left, offering polite excuses. Vanessa remained seated. I did not lecture her. I did not retaliate with cruelty. I simply stated that my decisions were about protection, not punishment. If she had believed I was declining, she was mistaken. If she had believed I was unaware, she was wrong. From the staircase, I noticed Lily watching, her small hands gripping the railing. I met her eyes briefly, hoping she would understand that calm strength can be louder than outrage. That afternoon marked a shift that could not be undone. Vanessa had attempted to position me as incapable. Instead, she witnessed something far more unsettling to her plans. I was not declining. I was deciding. After the intervention unraveled in my favor, the house did not return to normal. It became quieter, but not peaceful. Vanessa moved through the rooms with clipped efficiency, speaking only when necessary. There were no more staged conversations, no more polite concern. What replaced them was resentment, sharp and silent. Within a week, I received formal notice that she had filed a petition challenging the transfer of my assets into the irrevocable trust. The claim suggested I may not have been fully competent at the time I signed the documents. I was not surprised. If persuasion failed, she would attempt procedure. Harold Benton handled the response swiftly. The medical evaluation from the neurologist, conducted before the intervention, documented no cognitive impairment. The notarized trust documents were executed properly. My banking changes were recorded and verified. The court dismissed her petition without prolonged argument. Legally, the matter was settled. Emotionally, it was not. Vanessa's frustration turned inward toward the house itself. Doors closed harder than necessary. Conversations with Lily happened in lowered tones that stopped when I entered the room. I overheard fragments suggesting that I was dismantling the family, that I was choosing pride over love. The narrative had shifted from concern about my decline to disappointment in my independence. Lily became quieter. She lingered near me in the evenings, asking small questions about school that did not require real answers. I sensed her confusion. Children understand tension long before they understand its source. I wanted to explain everything to her, but I knew she should not be asked to take sides in a conflict between adults. For several nights, I lay awake in the bedroom Daniel and I once shared. The ceiling fan hummed softly above me, stirring warm desert air. I asked myself whether remaining in the house would prove strength or stubbornness. Legally, I had secured the property. Financially, I had stabilized my future. But the emotional climate inside those walls had shifted beyond repair. The house no longer felt like refuge. It felt like territory. Margaret Collins, my closest friend for over 20 years, called during one of those restless nights. She lived in Sedona, surrounded by red rock formations and wide skies. Years earlier, she had endured her own battle with financial manipulation from her son. She understood the particular loneliness of betrayal that arrives dressed as family. She did not offer dramatic advice. She simply said that her guest room was open if I needed space. The decision crystallized the following morning as I stood in the kitchen, sunlight stretching across the tile. I realized that staying would keep me anchored to a daily contest of wills. Leaving would not mean surrendering the house. It would mean reclaiming my peace. I packed methodically. A few suitcases, personal documents, photographs of Daniel and Lily. I did not strip the house of memories. I chose what I needed to move forward, not what tied me backward. When I carried the final bag to the car, Lily stood near the front door. Her eyes searched my face, uncertain. I knelt and hugged her, holding her longer than usual. I told her that sometimes adults need distance to think clearly. I did not blame her mother. I did not justify myself. I simply kissed her forehead. As I drove out of the neighborhood, I did not look into the rearview mirror. I was not abandoning my home. I was walking toward a version of myself that refused to live under quiet siege. If you are still watching and you understand how hard that decision was, comment number 6 below to stand with me. Because leaving was not the end of the battle, it was the beginning of the consequences. Now let us move on to chapter 7. Sedona greeted me with a different kind of silence. Instead of tension pressing against the walls, there was open sky and the steady outline of red rock formations beyond Margaret's back porch. Her home sat on a quiet street where mornings began with sunlight spilling over sandstone and evenings settled into deep violet shadows. The landscape did not erase what had happened, but it gave my thoughts room to breathe. For the first time in months, I slept without listening for footsteps in the hallway. Margaret did not pry. She understood the shape of betrayal without requiring explanation. Years earlier, her own son had attempted to leverage her retirement savings under the guise of temporary hardship. She had survived it with scars that were invisible but permanent. Over coffee one morning, she reminded me that consequences are not acts of revenge. They are the natural outcome of choices. Within weeks of my departure from Scottsdale, the consequences began to surface. A former colleague from my clinic called quietly to tell me that Vanessa had lost a part-time marketing contract she had been relying on. Word of the legal dispute had circulated more quickly than she expected. Clients are wary of instability, and her professional image had already been fragile. Without steady income, maintaining the house and daily expenses became increasingly difficult. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt a sober recognition that actions, once set in motion, rarely travel alone. More troubling were the updates concerning Lily. Her school counselor contacted me after learning that I was temporarily living elsewhere. Lily had been meeting with a child psychologist through the school due to signs of anxiety. She had grown withdrawn in class and easily startled at raised voices. When asked about home, she described tension she could not fully articulate. The psychologist requested permission to share certain concerns. Lily had admitted she felt responsible for keeping peace between her mother and grandmother. She also confessed that she was afraid of making her mother angry. The counselor's voice remained professional, but her recommendation was clear. The environment required evaluation. The report that followed was difficult to read. It stated that Lily had witnessed repeated verbal hostility directed toward me and had internalized fear as a normal household response. The psychologist suggested that a temporary change in guardianship might provide emotional stability while Vanessa addressed her own stressors. I sat with those words for a long time. Seeking custody of one's grandchild is not a gesture of triumph. It is an acknowledgement that something fundamental has fractured. I met with Harold again to review the options. He explained the process for petitioning the court for temporary guardianship, emphasizing that the standard would center entirely on Lily's welfare. There would be no moral judgment, only assessment. Filing the petition felt heavier than transferring the house into trust. The house was property. Lily was a living, feeling child. I wrestled with doubt. Would this action deepen the divide between Vanessa and me beyond repair? Would Lily interpret it as abandonment of her mother? Yet every hesitation returned to the same truth. Silence would not shield her. When I signed the petition, I did so without anger. I was not attempting to win. I was accepting responsibility. As the paperwork moved through the court system, I walked the red rock trails each evening, letting the vastness of the desert steady my breathing. This was no longer about reclaiming what was mine. It was about safeguarding what was hers. The court's decision arrived on a dry Tuesday afternoon. Temporary guardianship of Lily was granted to me, with structured visitation rights for Vanessa contingent upon her participation in counseling. The ruling did not condemn my daughter, nor did it praise me. It simply stated that, for now, stability required adjustment. Lily came to Sedona the following weekend with 2 suitcases and a quiet expression that carried more maturity than any child should possess. Margaret helped me prepare the guest room, which soon became Lily's room, filled with her books, her sketch pads, and the small stuffed fox she had slept with since kindergarten. The first few nights were tentative. She asked careful questions about school enrollment and whether her mother was angry. I answered gently, never criticizing Vanessa, only explaining that adults sometimes need help making better choices. Routine became our anchor. I enrolled Lily in a local elementary school nestled near the Red Rock formations. We established a schedule: breakfast together at the kitchen table, homework in the late afternoon, reading before bed. There were no raised voices, no whispered arguments behind closed doors. The house felt steady. Lily began sleeping through the night without waking from anxious dreams. Meanwhile, Vanessa began court-mandated therapy. At first, her emails were brief and defensive, focused on logistics rather than reflection. Over time, the tone shifted. She acknowledged financial recklessness. She admitted that she had tried to regain control of her life by controlling mine. In one message, she wrote, "I convinced myself you were the obstacle, not my choices." It was not a dramatic apology, but it was honest. Our communication remained structured and deliberate. We discussed Lily's school progress, visitation schedules, and therapy updates. The absence of manipulation was almost startling. For the first time in years, our exchanges did not leave me second-guessing my memory or my worth. As Lily adjusted, I began to consider what came next for me. Survival had occupied my focus for months. Now that the immediate crisis had stabilized, a quieter question emerged. What would I build from this experience? I had spent decades helping patients recover physical strength after injury. I understood rehabilitation, both muscular and emotional. The betrayal I endured was not unique. Many older women lack the resources or knowledge to protect themselves from financial exploitation, particularly when it originates within family. With Margaret's encouragement, I began planning a small advisory center in Sedona dedicated to educating women over 60 about asset protection, legal safeguards, and recognizing coercive tactics. I contacted Harold Benton for guidance on structuring workshops and invited a local financial planner to collaborate. The space we rented was modest, but it carried purpose. Opening day felt less like a business launch and more like a declaration. I was no longer reacting to someone else's strategy. I was defining my own. Vanessa attended therapy consistently. Her visitation with Lily became more relaxed as months passed. I noticed subtle changes in her language. She asked rather than assumed. She listened rather than redirected. Trust did not return overnight, but it began inching forward in cautious increments. One evening, I watched Lily at the dining table in our new home, her head bent over a math assignment, sunlight fading beyond the canyon walls. The air inside the house felt balanced, not fragile. We were not the family I once envisioned, gathered seamlessly under one roof. But we were something more truthful. This life was not built on denial or dominance. It was built on clarity. And clarity, I had learned, is stronger than control. If you are still here and seeing how everything is rebuilding, comment number 8 below, so I know you are ready for the final outcome. The ending is not about revenge. It is about what was truly taken back. Let us move into the conclusion. 2 years later, Sedona is no longer a refuge. It is home. The red rock formations that once felt like a dramatic backdrop to crisis have become part of my ordinary rhythm. I wake before sunrise most mornings, step onto my small back patio, and watch the light move slowly across the canyon walls. The air is crisp, clean, and honest. There is no tension hiding behind closed doors. No whispered strategy unfolding in the next room. The advisory center I opened has grown beyond what I first imagined. What began as a modest series of workshops for women over 60 has developed into a steady program with monthly seminars on estate planning, recognizing coercive financial control, and protecting retirement assets. We collaborate with local attorneys, financial planners, and social workers. Last spring, the Arizona Association for Senior Advocacy recognized our Center for Community Education. I accepted the certificate without fanfare. The work matters more than the recognition. The women who attend often arrive with the same expression I once carried: confusion mixed with embarrassment. Many struggle to admit that manipulation came from someone they love. I never present myself as a victim. Instead, I outline procedures, documentation, and boundaries. Clarity is empowering. I see shoulders straighten as information replaces fear. At home, Lily is 12 now, taller, steadier. The anxious child who once flinched at raised voices has transformed into a thoughtful young girl with a quick sense of humor. She joined a local art club and recently displayed one of her paintings at a community exhibit. Her teachers describe her as focused and engaged. When she studies at the dining table in the evenings, there is concentration in her posture rather than worry. Vanessa remains in Scottsdale, working full-time for a regional marketing firm. Therapy did not transform her overnight, but it altered her trajectory. Our communication is structured and respectful. She visits Lily twice a month and calls her regularly. During early visits, there was stiffness in her posture, as if she feared missteps. Over time, I noticed her listening more carefully, responding rather than reacting. Last autumn, after one of Lily's school performances, Vanessa approached me in the parking lot. The air carried the faint scent of desert rain. She looked older than she had 2 years earlier, not in years, but in awareness. "I thought you were weak," she said quietly. I was wrong. There was no dramatic apology, no attempt to rewrite history, just a recognition. I considered how to respond. Anger had long since lost its usefulness. "Patience is not weakness," I told her. She nodded, absorbing the distinction. We did not embrace. We did not pretend the past had been a misunderstanding. Trust rebuilds slowly, like bone healing after fracture. It requires alignment and time. What we have now is not the seamless closeness I once envisioned when she was a child. It is something more deliberate. Lily moves between our homes with increasing ease. She understands that boundaries exist not to divide, but to protect. Vanessa asks, before making decisions that affect her. I offer input without surrendering authority. The roles are clear. I no longer measure my worth by how much I endure. I measure it by how clearly I define what is acceptable. Looking back, I did not simply reclaim property or secure accounts. I reclaimed authorship of my life. We did not return to who we were before conflict fractured us. We became who we needed to be in order to move forward without fear. When my daughter called me a disgusting old hag, I felt something fracture inside me. At the time, I believed it was heartbreak. Now, years later, I understand it was illusion breaking apart. That sentence did not diminish me. It revealed the cost of shrinking myself to preserve peace. People sometimes assume that when I say I took everything back, I am referring to money. They imagine bank accounts restored, legal documents secured, property protected. All of that is true, but it is not the center of the story. The center is far less visible and far more significant. I took back my authority. For too long, I had equated love with endurance. I believed that patience required silence, that loyalty required accommodation, that motherhood required sacrifice without boundary. Those beliefs made me generous, but they also made me vulnerable. When generosity is not met with respect, it becomes a doorway for control. Financial exploitation rarely begins with theft. It begins with suggestion. A small decision made on your behalf. A password shared for convenience. A comment planted about forgetfulness. Each act alone appears harmless. Together, they form a narrative designed to reposition you from decision maker to dependent. The moment I recognized that pattern, I faced a choice. I could defend my pride quietly and hope it would correct itself, or I could confront the structure being built around me. Taking everything back meant stepping into discomfort. It meant risking my daughter's anger. It meant accepting that family harmony built on imbalance is not harmony at all. What I reclaimed first was clarity. I examined accounts. I consulted professionals. I documented facts. Clarity dismantled doubt. Once doubt loosened its grip, fear followed. What I reclaimed next was my voice, not through shouting, but through boundaries. I revoked access. I transferred assets into protective structures. I moved when the environment became corrosive. Each action stated something simple. I am not declining. I am deciding. There is a quiet myth about aging that unsettles me now. It suggests that growing older requires surrendering influence, that experience must yield to youth simply because youth is louder. I no longer accept that myth. Age refines judgment. It does not erase it. Patience is not weakness. It is measured strength. My relationship with Vanessa is no longer defined by authority or defiance. It is defined by responsibility. She has faced consequences that were neither dramatic nor vindictive, merely natural. She learned that control masquerading as concern eventually exposes itself. I learned that enabling out of guilt corrodes trust. Lily, perhaps, is the truest measure of change. She has witnessed conflict, but she has also witnessed resolution grounded in self-respect. She understands that love and boundaries can coexist. That lesson will travel with her far longer than any financial inheritance. If I had remained silent the night those words were spoken, the story would have unfolded differently. I might still possess the house, perhaps even the accounts, but I would have lost something subtler: my authorship. Taking everything back was not about reclaiming assets from my daughter. It was about reclaiming identity from fear. The insult that once stung now feels like a turning point. It forced me to confront the cost of invisibility. It required me to choose dignity over convenience. The night my daughter called me a disgusting old hag was the night I stopped shrinking. It was the night I began to take everything back. Sometimes the hardest battles are not fought in courtrooms or living rooms, but within the quiet space where self-respect either survives or disappears. Growing older does not mean growing smaller. It means understanding your worth without needing it validated by others. Boundaries are not walls built out of anger. They are foundations built out of clarity. Love, when it is healthy, does not require silence. It requires truth. Taking everything back is rarely about possessions. It is about reclaiming voice, dignity, and the right to decide how your life will unfold. Strength is not loud. It is steady. And sometimes the most powerful transformation begins the moment you refuse to shrink. Thank you for being here and walking through this journey. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and consider following and subscribing for more stories about resilience, dignity, and second chances.